الجزيرة صوتنا في العالم.
With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The Algerian Radio has organised in coordination with the National Independent Electoral Authority a training day under the motto Legal and Professional Rules Applicable to Media Coverage of Elections. The Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October 7th has risen to 37,600, and the UNRWA said that 69% of the school buildings housing displaced people in Gaza have been bombed. The Arab League called for collective international efforts to save the Sudanese state and prevent its collapse. Those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. Good afternoon. The Algerian Radio has organised in coordination with the National Independent Electoral Authority, ANIE, a training day for the benefit of directors of national and regional radios under the theme Legal and Professional Rules Applicable to Media Coverage of the Election. Asya Bekkar has more details.
In a speech delivered on this occasion, the Director General of the Algerian Radio, Mohamed Baghali, indicated that this initiative comes in anticipation of the important event of the presidential election on September 7th, stressing that such trainings aim to ensure quality participation in the coverage of this important event.
The goal is to allow the staff of the National Radio to contribute with a high sense of ethics and professionalism in the coverage of these elections, and I would like to thank, on the occasion, our friends from ANI who responded favorably to this initiative. We thank our expert in the field, Mr. Ahsan Jaballa, who highlighted during his speech all his experience in the coverage of elections in general and presidential elections in particular. After that, I think that the contribution, as usual, of the National Radio will be very active and positive in covering these elections, which will once again highlight this new Algeria geared towards positivity.
During this training day, a member of ANI, Karim Khalfan, made a presentation of the rules governing media practices on such occasions, stressing the importance of the role of the press in supporting all stages of the electoral process, from the convening of the elections until the announcement of the final results. He underlined that journalists represent a link between all the actors: independent National Electoral Authority, candidates, voters, civil society and institutions, adding that this grants them a key role which they must play in compliance with legal and professional rules. In the same line, the representative of the National Independent Electoral Authority recalled the amendments introduced by the 2020 Constitution, notably with regard to freedom of expression and of the press, as well as the access to sources of information. He also insisted on the need for journalists to demonstrate professionalism and respect the ethics of the profession in the media coverage of this major event.
The National Democratic Rally, RND, has called here in Algiers the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, to stand as a candidate in the presidential election scheduled for September 7th, so that the structural reforms initiated by Algeria during his first mandate can be completed. More details in this report by Mohamed Khatel.
The National Democratic Rally, RND, indicated in a press release published at the end of the extraordinary session of its National Council that it called on the President of the Republic to run for a second term to preserve the social achievements enjoyed by Algerian citizens, particularly in the face of future challenges which require the consolidation of achievements, with the same determination, the same will, and the same forward-looking vision as that of the President of the Republic. For its part, the Sawt al-Shab party called on the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, to stand as a candidate in the presidential election on September 7 to consolidate the political and socio-economic stability of the country. The President of Sawt al-Shab party, Lamine Osmani, specified at the end of the session of the National Council of the political formation that the call launched to the President of the Republic to run for a second term aims to allow him to complete his 54 commitments and to consolidate the political, socio-economic and security stability of the country. He added that the decision reflects the party's adherence to the approach aimed at ensuring that the utmost interests of the nation prevail, with a view to preserving the security of our country and protecting it against hostile campaigns of destabilization which target it. On this occasion, Mr. Osmani invited citizens to participate massively in the next presidential elections and to express their will freely and with responsibility to make this election a democratic event. Meanwhile, the Al Mustaqbal Front also called on President Tebboune to run for the next presidential election and to seek a new mandate to carry on his ambitious reform program. In a speech delivered by the president of the party, Mr. Fatah Boutbik, and unanimously approved by the members of its National Council at the end of its extraordinary session, the Front Al Mustaqbal indicated that its decision stems from a sincere conviction favoring the utmost interests of the country for the preservation of its stability, its security, and the cohesion of its institutions, and aims to ensure the continuity of the ambitious reform program carried out by the President of the Republic.
The 55th edition of the Algiers International Fair will kick off tomorrow at the exhibition hall here in Algiers with the participation of around 700 national exhibitors and foreigners representing around 20 countries. The international event, which confirms each year's status as a major economic event, will be held under the slogan Exchange Bridges and Partnership and Investment Opportunities, with Turkey as a guest of honor. The first Algerian Korean Forum on Energy Efficiency will be held in Algiers tomorrow with a view to exchanging and sharing know-how and strengthening cooperation in this field, the Commissionership for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. The forum will provide an opportunity to exchange experience on the energy efficiency of household electrical appliances, to share regulations on energy efficiency, including those relating to labeling and minimum energy performance standards for household electrical appliances, and to discuss the types of projects dedicated to the energy efficiency of household electrical appliances. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has called for collective efforts to promote peace in the world. Asia Bakar has the details.
In a message for Peace Building Day on June 23rd, the UN chief stressed the need to focus on the timeless tools of dialogue, diplomacy and negotiation. Mr. Guterres stressed that there is no higher calling than the pursuit of peace, adding that in too many countries and communities around the world, this peace is lacking at a time when conflict and violence spread misery, suffering and death, striking millions of people everywhere. The senior UN official emphasized the importance of working individually and collectively to build peace. He said we must focus on prevention as called for in the new agenda for peace to build trust, heal strife, spur development and stem the tide of violence spreading through communities before it gets out of hand. He went on to say that the United Nations system salutes the women and men around the world who are working tirelessly to build solid foundations for peace today and tomorrow.
The Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October 7th has risen to 37,598 reported facilities, with an additional 86,032 individuals sustaining injuries. The majority of victims are women and children. Israeli occupation forces committed 3 main massacres against families in the Gaza Strip over the last 24 hours, resulting in the documented killing of at least 47 Palestinians and the injury of 120 others. Meanwhile, ambulance and rescue teams are still unable to reach many casualties and dead bodies trapped under the rubble or scattered on roads across the war-torn enclave as Israeli occupation forces continue to obstruct the movement of ambulance and civil defense crews. 5 Palestinians were killed and 7 others were injured in an Israeli bombing that targeted the main eastern gate of the headquarters of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, southwest of Gaza City. A warplane targeted the guard room at the main eastern gate of the UNRWA headquarters in Tal el-Hawa area, southwest of Gaza City, killing 5 people, some of them dismembered, and wounding 7 others, including children and women. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, Israeli occupation forces have conducted a series of detentions across the West Bank since last night, rounding up to at least 20 individuals, including minors and a high school student and former prisoners. The arrests were concentrated in El Khalil Governorate, with additional cases reported in Nablus, Ramallah, Kalkhira, Ariha and Tubas. Reports accompanying their arrest indicated widespread mistreatment of the detainees, including severe beating, threats against detainees and their families, and extensive property damage. Meanwhile, Israeli occupation forces demolished 3 residential homes this morning in the village of El Duyuk, northwest of the city of Ariha, in the eastern occupied West Bank. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, has said that as many as 69% of school buildings housing displaced people in the Gaza Strip have been bombed. UNRWA said in a post published on X platform that 69% of school buildings where displaced families sought refuge were directly affected or damaged. In this context, the UN office indicated that this blatant disregard for humanitarian law must stop, reiterating its call for an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. It's worth noting that the death toll from the Zionist genocidal aggression against the Gaza Strip rose on Saturday to 37,551 martyrs. Belgium today slammed the loss of Palestinian civilians due to the ongoing Israeli genocidal aggression on the Gaza Strip as unacceptable. Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs Hadj Al Habib called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and urged all parties to pave the way to peace. She reposted EU Foreign Affairs Chief Joseph Borrell remarks calling for an independent investigation into a deadly shelling that hit the ICRC office in Gaza. Joseph Borrell said on X that the EU condemns the shelling which damaged the ICRC office in Gaza and led to dozens of casualties. He added an independent investigation is needed and those responsible must be held accountable. Demonstrations in support of the Palestinian cause and denouncing the Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip have been staged against in the Italian capital, Rome. Hundreds of supporters of the Palestinian cause and members of Arab communities participated in the demonstration, raising Palestinian flags and chanting slogans rejecting the attacks. Contacted by our colleague Fatima Zahra Saadin, the president of the Palestinian Students Association in Italy, Maya Hissa, said supporting just causes is a duty.
Our solidarity with the Palestinian people is a humanitarian and moral duty. In the face of the continuous bombardments of the Gaza Strip, this duty has become even more urgent. The demonstrations and peaceful gatherings aim not only to supporting the Palestinian people, but also to send a clear message to the Arab leaders that the Palestinian cause is a common Arab cause. We would like to express our gratitude and recognition to Lebanon, Algeria, Yemen, and Iraq for their constant support to the Palestinian people.
Let's recall that demonstrations in support of the Palestinian cause and denouncing the Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip are being staged in Rome. A group of 60 civil society organizations have voiced grave concern about the dire humanitarian situation in Sudan and appealed to the world community to take the necessary measures to protect millions of vulnerable civilian populations in need and to avert a looming humanitarian tragedy. Mohamed Khatil has the details.
The organizations call on the international community to urgently meet the financial pledges they made in Paris on April 15, 2024, and further encourage the donor community to consider providing additional funding for the humanitarian work. They said the Sudanese people, victims of many years of tyranny and atrocious acts inside Sudan and abroad, deserve the generous support of all peace-loving people. The undersigned organizations regret that the internal armed conflict engulfs about 80% of Sudan's territory as the fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces continues unabated, and violence or threats thereof is reported even in safe states. The statement highlights that since April 15, 2023, millions of civilians were uprooted, including at least 10 million forced to flee their homes and seek shelter elsewhere in the country, thus making Sudan the worst case of internal displacement in the world. Meanwhile, more than 2 million civilians were forced to cross Sudan's international borders and seek refuge in neighboring countries, often without life-saving support or facing severe security risks.
The Secretary-General of the Arab League, Ahmed Aboul Gheit, called for a collective international effort to save the Sudanese state and prevent its collapse. Aboul Gheit stressed the need to implement the resolution adopted by the Security Council last week, which called on rapid support paramilitary forces RSF to end the siege of El Fasher city, the capital of North Darfur state, and immediately stop the fighting. He also reaffirmed the importance of implementing the agreements of the Jeddah platform to return to the peaceful path to resolve the Sudanese crisis and launch a Sudanese-led dialogue. The World Food Programme, for its part, warned on the repercussions of the Sudanese crisis on neighbouring countries following the displacement of more than 2 million people, notably to Chad and South Sudan. The organisation warned that the Sudanese crisis continues its repercussions on neighbouring countries, and increasing it added that more than 2 million people were displaced from the country as a result of the war, and more than half of them live in Chad and South Sudan, which are countries that are already suffering from high levels of hunger. Since mid-April 2023, the Sudanese army, led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Rapid Support Paramilitary Forces, RSF, led by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hamdati, have been in conflict. The UN Security Council will meet tomorrow for a public briefing, followed by a close consultation on the situation in Somalia. Somalia, which was elected on June 6 as a non-permanent member of the Security Council for 2020-25 to 2026 by the UN General Assembly, representing the East African region, is expected to participate under Rule 37 of the Council Provisional Rules of Procedures. And now the Algerian Football Federation has condemned the unfortunate defamation campaign directed against the national team, whose owners use fake accounts on social media networks to carry out their malicious propaganda for hidden purposes. At a time when the national team began to gradually regain its stability and performance, it seemed that this did not please some circles known for their irresponsible behavior and attempts to destabilize. That's it for today's news bulletin. I invite you to listen to this special program by my colleague Asya Bakkar.
The international event of the week.
Hello there and welcome to our weekly program, the International Event of the Week. Qatar says some progress in negotiations for a ceasefire in Gaza has been made, and it is continuing mediation to bridge the gap between the Hamas resistance movement and the Israeli occupation. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that some of the amendments proposed by Hamas to the United States proposal for truce in Gaza are not workable, as he put it, but efforts to reach an agreement are continuing. Joining us on the phone, our political analyst and Professor Hamoud Salhi to answer our questions. Mr. Salhi, what is the ideal deal that can be accepted by both sides?
Currently, there are three grand strategic proposals. The Zionist plan is obviously based on continuous occupation, annexation of Gaza, and expelling all Palestinians. The second proposal is that which is led by the American, which is centered around the idea of establishing some kind of governing authority in Gaza with under no legal authority or sovereign state, which allows Israel to still continue to have its full control. The third proposal obviously is what the Palestinians are looking for: full sovereignty, end of occupation, reconstruction of Gaza, and above all, have a Palestinian state, Palestinian leadership that is in charge of its destiny. It is hard, extremely hard at this point, to imagine an occupying power like the Zionist states to accept a deal that would lead to a Palestinian state, for that matter. And therefore, it is not the ideal deal would be to allow the Palestinians to get their full sovereignty. But that deal would not be accepted by the Palestinians. This is why the Palestinians have been leading a resistance that has forced Israel to reconsider its plan, and it has basically defeated the Israelis. And it is in this context that a peace proposal is only fair to the extent that it is accepted by the Palestinians, and it gets back what the Palestinians rights to live in peace and fully independent.
How do you assess the role played by the UN Security Council?
It has been a disappointing performance. On the one hand, there is plenty of records now that indicate, that shows the extent to which the Palestinians have gained ground international and be recognized as having legitimate cause, one that would recognize their independence and their full sovereignty. At the same time, when we look at the results, the ability to implement, to enforce laws or resolution that the United Nations Security Council it has implemented, we could see easily that the United Nations Security Council preaches peace all over the world except in Palestine. And it is in that context that any assessment of the United Nations Security Council will fail the test of being fair, balanced, and implementing what's mission, the mission of United Nations, to carry out a decision that would lead to stability and peace in the world. For the fact that the United States continues to hold the United Nations security hostage to its interests, using its vetoes without any consequences, and is a clear indication that this Security Council has to be reformed and its mission has to be reconsidered. At the same time, if we take we could look at what's happening on the ground, the continuous genocide activities led by Israel without being punished or held accountable, for the Israeli leadership to go and attack the United Nations under the full pretext this unfair. All of these are indication that shows that this Security Council has lost its rightfulness to exist as a protector for world peace. And sadly enough, as I mentioned earlier, this seems to apply almost everywhere in the world, except when it comes to issues that involve the South or countries that are less privileged as those in the North. And Palestine is only one of those cases.
Confrontation between the Israeli occupation and Hezbollah is escalating, with both saying they are prepared for war. Would Hamas-Israeli occupation ceasefire prevent a further escalation in southern Lebanon?
The obvious first scenario is that an end or ceasefire in Gaza would likely lead to a ceasefire in Lebanon. This is based on the idea that the Hezbollah leadership is on record for saying that they would support Palestinians in Gaza and they would stop their war against the Jewish states when Gaza is free and independent. So from that perspective, it is likelihood that an end to this conflict in Gaza may be leading to an end in the conflict in South Lebanon. But that is really too simplistic because there are so many issues involved in that perspective. Another scenario sees that the Israelis are looking for a way to get out of Gaza in an attempt to save their face. Having been defeated and with no achievement to show for, the Israeli may be looking at a full-blown war with Hezbollah under the false pretext that they have neutralized Hamas, and therefore they are now ready to do the same thing in Lebanon. But that is a false pretext because just as Hamas and the Palestinian resistance have defeated Israel in Gaza, so has Hezbollah. So in a lot of ways, an end of the conflict and a ceasefire in Gaza, which would be good news for the Palestinians, it could lead to a stop or de-escalation of the conflict to Lebanon. But at the same time, it could be a pretext that the Israelis would use to continue their attack on Lebanon under the false pretext that they are, just as they won the war in Hamas wrongly, they would do the same thing with Hezbollah. We will have to wait and see.
Political analyst and Professor Hamoud Salhi, thank you so much for joining us.
area the Rais Palace, also known as Bastion 23, which is located in the lower part of the old city of Algiers, or Kasbah, is an Algerian architectural jewel built during the Ottoman era in the 18th century, precisely in 1576 AD, by Deyramden Pasha. The palace, which consists of 3 palaces and 6 houses, was meant to strengthen and reinforce the defences and maritime protection of the city. The name of Bastion 23 was given to the palace following the construction of the ramparts during the then French colonial rule. Archaeologist Kahina Muhus gives us a glimpse of the history of Bastion 23.
Well, we can date back the order of construction of the Bastion 23 to 1576, when a defensive battery was commissioned by Mami Arnott to Ramatan Pasha. Its expansion was recorded from 1750. It was purchased by Qara Mustafa in 1797, then by Dey Mustafa a year later. Finally, in the 1800s, the palaces 23 and 17 were built.
The architecture of Bastion 23 is unique. The ceilings are made from cedar or cedar logs, which are resistant to damp and termites, and other wood-based ceilings decorated and carved with geometric and floral motifs in polychrome, as well as rigid ceilings in hallways, kitchens and bathrooms. The dining room is located in Palace 18, with windows overlooking the sea, niches on the walls lined with earthenware tiles, and a decorative shelf. This room also has niches for oil lamps. You can find Sqifa, which is a reception area separating the inside from the outside to maintain the privacy of the harem. The latter has 3 entrances, the first leading to the stable below, the second to a small room used as a fireplace, and the last opening onto the patio with slight benches. Archaeologist Kahina Muhus has more on the fascinating architecture of Bastion 23.
The architecture of the Bastion 23 is really wealthy, and that back from the Roman era. We had mosaics depicting fish skull and a Roman bath. It was dated from the 2nd and 3rd century. During the Islamic era, we had a lot of architectural elements. For example, we have ceilings which were made from cedar wood, decorated with geometric and floral polychromes, arches which were made from marble or tuff, ceramic stills known as zillage, either locally made or imported from Italy and Tunisia.
Bastion 23 bears witness to the economic, social and urban progress of the city of Algiers since 1600. The palace served as a political center as well as a home for Algeria's ruling family. This historic monument is a settlement with several rows, including defense, with its ammunition depot, and a middle-class district with the beauty of its street source, in addition to the modest fishermen's dwellings. According to the archaeologist Kahina Muhus, the importance of the Bastion 23 is defined by the various roles it played throughout history.
Rather than the signification, I would say the importance, and it was defined through the various roles it had played in the past. Firstly, a defensive structure with a location chosen to protect Algiers. Then, with years and time, it became a residential area where we can distinguish various social classes thanks